Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen. This idea that we're the only gas-producing state in the nation that doesn't have a severance tax, I felt like that theory was debunked yesterday when the Independent Fiscal Office testified that we do, in fact, have a severance tax here. We just call it an impact fee. But if we take your approach, Mr. Secretary, and we want to look at the traditional tax structure of a severance tax, and the idea that because we're extracting a natural resource out of the earth and the government needs to recoup that like other states, then wouldn't it be fair to have a full discussion about coal, timber, sandstone, gravel? If we're going to use a West Virginia model about taxing, having a severance tax on extracting natural resources, wouldn't we want to look at their total approach to taxing coal, timber, other natural resources rather than just this one?
Well, Representative, what I can say is that the governor has assessed the situation relative to Pennsylvania's fiscal health, the need to make fundamental reforms, the need to do something different, because doing nothing is not an option, and he has proposed what I think is a very reasonable and balanced severance tax on gas development,
okay.
Unconventional.
So the answer is no. And in fairness to the chairman's request, the answer to that is the governor's not looking at timber. He's not looking at coal extraction. He's only looking at natural gas, unlike other states in the country.
He has not proposed anything along those lines.
Okay. And therefore, if we're going to look at the severance tax just for the natural gas revenue, I think you mentioned today $675 million in new borrowing for alternative energy subsidies, investments, and agenda. $670 million, $225 million, I think you said, for solar energy subsidies. But then I think you even said quickly that that was going to be paid back by the severance tax, correct?
The borrowing that the governor has proposed would be financed with $55 million of the proceeds of the severance tax, but it's an economic development package, of which $225 million is energy related.
Okay, $225 million is going to be paid back by $55 million of...
$675 million.
Okay.
The total will be paid for through the proceeds of the severance tax.
Why don't we just wait for the severance tax revenue to come in rather than have a debt service of $55 million? Why? I mean, what's the rush if we're going to pay it back through the severance tax? Why do we need to do the bonding with the debt service costs when the governor's also talking about our bond rating going in the wrong direction?
Well, that question would probably be better answered by the Budget Office or the Revenue Secretary, but what I would say is there is an opportunity, thanks to low rates, to create a significant amount of investment which will have a big economic impact on the state by taking the approach that the governor has proposed.
One final point then on the severance tax proceeds. What I heard today is we're going to pay back we're going to borrow $675 million. We're going to put $1 billion in for education increase. We're going to pay $225 million a year through the impact fee driven out to local areas. But the Revenue Secretary said yesterday, based on production and current prices, we're going to bring in about $125 million. Could you talk, and they also said that the DEP was who was providing the production numbers. Can you talk about your expectations for production in the next fiscal year?
Well, I don't know that we project production numbers in the next fiscal year, and I believe the severance tax is structured on some type of a quarterly average. But what I will say is that production of unconventional natural gas in Pennsylvania since 2004 has vastly exceeded everybody's expectations. The production is off the charts. We're sitting on the most productive natural gas deposit in the world, and it has in every instance and in every year exceeded expectations.
I understand that, but from how does the Revenue Department project a revenue estimate for a tax that has a production element tied to it and a price element tied to it? Their price needs a 50% increase in the next 3 months to hit that estimate, and then the DEP is saying they don't have an estimate on the production side. So we're supposed to build a budget which spends almost $2 billion. They're saying we're going to make $125 million, and neither one can provide the elements for us to have any realistic expectation of what revenue projections are going to be.
Again, I have not read the legislation because I believe it just dropped today, but in terms of estimating or applying the tax, it has to be retroactive. It can't be a prospective number. You can trend line things out in terms of projecting out your revenues. The simple fact is we have production data that comes in from the industry that is self-reported. It is adjusted, it is corrected, it is updated, it is made as accurate as possible. It is submitted to the agency under penalty of perjury. So we have every reason to rely on the reporting that is done by the industry, and the numbers in terms of production speak for themselves. They're off the charts.
And I would also say that they speak to capital cost reductions would have to be, I would think, identified. So $8 to $10 billion of reduced capital investment by that industry in the next fiscal year probably has some impact on production. And then not to mention the rig count, the active rig count. I would also think that if you are going to build a projection of what production will look like, the fact that active rig counts are back to where they were in 2009, I think should give us all a little bit of concern about just assuming that production is going to grow as it has the years in past. But from all of this, I am shocked that the administration would continue to talk about $1 billion revenue number with no production estimate and a cost estimate that's 50% higher than what the current market is in Pennsylvania, and expect us to build a budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.